He does not complain. He does not explain himself. He does not need you to understand what he is doing, or why he stopped doing the things he used to do. He simply stopped. Quietly. Without a speech. Without a farewell post. Without asking anyone's permission. You are going to meet that version of yourself tonight. But I need you to promise me something first. Do not tell anyone what you are about to hear. Not because it is forbidden, it isn't. Not because it is dangerous, it isn't that either. But because the moment you announce a change, you give it away. You spend the energy of doing it on the satisfaction of saying it. And the people around you, the ones who benefit from the old version of you, will find a way to talk you out of it before you've even started. So keep this between us. 2,000 years ago, a man sat alone in a tent on the edge of the Roman Empire, somewhere along a frozen river in what is now Germany or Austria, and wrote a private journal that was never meant for anyone's eyes but his own. He was the most powerful man alive. He commanded armies. He held the fate of nations in the palm of his hand. And in that tent, at night, exhausted, he wrote to himself the way a man writes when he is trying to survive his own mind. His name was Marcus Aurelius. And the book he never meant to publish is now called Meditations. If you have read even a little of it, you already know it is not a book of grand declarations. It is a book of subtraction. Page after page, entry after entry, he is not adding wisdom to his life. He is removing weakness from it. He is not asking what more he can become. He is asking what he can finally let go of. That is the secret nobody tells you about discipline. It was never about doing more. It was about quietly eliminating what was never serving you in the first place. Tonight we go through 10 of those eliminations. Some of them will sting. 1 or 2 of them might make you a little angry, because they are close to home. That is normal. That is actually the sign you are in the right place. Here's what most people miss about this list. It isn't a list of bad habits. It is a list of identities. Every single item on it is something you have built part of yourself around. Removing it will not feel like decluttering a drawer. It will feel like losing a limb you didn't know you were still using. Stay with me anyway. Let's begin with the first one, because it is the one hiding underneath almost every other problem on this list. Number 1. The need for other people's approval. Marcus Aurelius wrote something to himself that should be printed on the inside of every phone screen in the world. He reminded himself, again and again, that other people's opinions of him were none of his business. Not because he didn't care about people, he cared about them deeply, he ruled them, he tried to protect them, but because he understood a brutal mathematical truth. You cannot control what anyone thinks of you. You can only control what you do. And spending your limited hours managing an outcome you have zero power over is not humility. It is a slow, quiet form of self-destruction. Think about how much of your day is spent doing this. The caption you rewrote 4 times before posting. The text message you read back twice, worried it sounded too cold, or too eager, or too much like you don't care, or too much like you care too much. The outfit you changed because of what one person might say. None of that is vanity. It's fear wearing a nicer outfit. You already know this. But here is what you don't know. Every single person you are trying to impress is doing the exact same performance for someone else. Nobody in that chain is actually watching you the way you fear they are. They are far too busy managing their own imaginary audience. The Stoics had a word for the opposite of this trap. The Greek word is autarkia, self-sufficiency. Not isolation. Not arrogance. Just the quiet, private confidence that your worth does not require a vote. Quietly eliminate the vote. Nobody will notice you did it. That's exactly the point. There's a smaller, sneakier version of this need that hides in places you'd never suspect. It's not just the big decisions, the career change, the breakup, the move to a new city. It's the tiny ones. The way you order your coffee differently when someone is watching. The way you laugh a half-second longer at a joke that wasn't actually that funny, because the person who told it is someone you want to like you. The way you agree to plans you don't want to make, simply because saying no felt like it would cost you something you couldn't name. None of these moments feel like anything on their own. That's what makes them dangerous. They don't announce themselves as a crisis. They accumulate, quietly, silently, until one day you look at your life and realize you built an entire personality out of other people's expectations, one small unnoticed compromise at a time. Marcus Aurelius understood this danger better than almost anyone who ever lived, precisely because his entire life was lived in public. Every decision he made as emperor was watched, judged, recorded by historians who would write about him for centuries after his death. And still, in the one place no one else could read, he kept reminding himself of the same simple truth. Other people's judgment is not your business. Your only business is whether the judgment you hold of yourself, in private, is one you can live with. That's the test. Not whether the room approves. Whether you would still make the same choice if the room were empty. Number 2. Complaining. You already know where this one is going, but stay with me, because the ancient version of this problem is far more interesting than the modern one. There was no Instagram in Rome. But there was something almost as corrosive, the endless comparison of status, of villas, of who dined with the emperor last, of whose sons held which office. Marcus Aurelius lived surrounded by exactly the kind of performative wealth and status game you scroll through every night before bed. And his answer to it was not to win the game harder. It was to stop playing entirely. He reminded himself that very little of what people compete over has any real value at all, most of it is smoke and mirrors, agreed upon by everyone at once, mattering only because everyone has decided together to pretend it matters. Here's what most people miss about comparison. It is mathematically impossible to win. There will always be someone younger, richer, more relaxed looking, further along, with a nicer kitchen, a calmer marriage, a better six-pack, a bigger following. The scroll is engineered, quite literally engineered by teams of very smart people, to make sure you never reach the bottom of that feeling. There is no bottom. There is only the next photo. You already know one person who seems immune to this. Think of them right now. Chances are, that person simply checks less. Not because they are somehow morally superior to you, but because they made one small quiet decision a long time ago to stop feeding the loop. And once you stop feeding it, it starves. It doesn't take willpower forever. It only takes willpower at the beginning. Here's the part nobody tells you about complaining. It doesn't relieve pressure. It creates the illusion of relief while actually rehearsing the pain deeper into your nervous system. Every time you tell the story of what went wrong, you are not processing it. You are performing it. And your mind, which cannot always tell the difference between a memory and a rehearsal, files it away as something that is still happening to you. Marcus Aurelius commanded legions during a plague that may have killed as many as 5 million people across the empire, according to the Roman historian who lived through it, Cassius Dio. He buried friends. He buried family. He watched the world he was responsible for collapse in slow motion. And in his private notebook, the one place he could have said anything, he does not spiral into complaint. He writes to himself instead about the shortness of life, and the necessity of acting well within it, regardless of what is happening around him. This is not toxic positivity. This is not pretending the plague didn't happen. It's the opposite of pretending. It's fully acknowledging the disaster, and then refusing to let the disaster narrate the rest of your day. Try this for 1 week. Every time you feel the complaint rising in your throat, ask yourself one question before you let it out. Is saying this out loud going to change the situation, or am I just going to feel the situation twice? Most of the time, you already know the answer. But it gets stranger, because complaining has a second cost most people never notice. It trains the people around you to see you as someone who is always slightly under attack by life. And eventually, without meaning to, they start treating you that way. They stop bringing you good news, because good news feels wrong next to someone who is always narrating a disaster. Silence isn't just self-discipline here. It's self-protection. Number 3. The comparison loop. Here's the part that makes this particular trap so cruel. Comparison doesn't just steal your peace. It steals your gratitude, and gratitude was never a luxury feeling. It was, according to almost every ancient school of thought, the actual foundation of a good life. You cannot feel grateful for what you have while simultaneously auditing what you lack. The two states are mutually exclusive, and your nervous system can genuinely only run one of them at a time. Every minute spent measuring your life against a stranger's highlight reel is a minute stolen directly from your capacity to notice the good that is already sitting right in front of you, waiting, patiently, to be appreciated. Marcus Aurelius kept a private habit that modern psychologists would recognize instantly. Before sleep, he would review the day and remind himself of the good he had witnessed or received, no matter how difficult the day had been. Not to force positivity onto a bad situation, but to make sure the comparison loop never got the last word before he closed his eyes. Number 4. Talking about your plans before you've done them. This one will feel strange at first, because we live in a culture that rewards announcement. But listen closely, because this is one of the oldest pieces of wisdom in the whole discipline, and almost nobody follows it anymore. The philosopher Epictetus, whose teachings shaped Marcus Aurelius more than almost any other single influence, gave this instruction directly to his students. Do not announce your intentions to the crowd. Simply do the thing you have decided to do, and let the results speak once they exist. Why? Because talking about a goal releases a small hit of social reward in your brain before you've earned it. Researchers have measured this directly. Announcing an intention can produce a feeling of accomplishment almost identical to actually achieving it, which quietly drains the motivation you needed to go finish the job. There's a reason the disciplined people you admire rarely narrate their transformation while it's happening. You don't hear about the diet. You don't hear about the business. You don't hear about the relationship they're repairing behind closed doors. You just, one day, see the result. And you wonder how they did it so quietly. Now watch what happens next, because this connects directly to the story we're going to return to later. There's one more thing hiding underneath this lesson, and it involves the exact place where the real Marcus Aurelius died, quietly, with almost no fanfare at all, in a military camp far from Rome, but we'll get to that. For now, just try the experiment. Pick one goal this week. Tell no one. Not your partner, not your group chat, not the internet. Just do it. Notice how different the motivation feels when there's no applause waiting at the announcement stage, only the applause waiting at the finish line. Number 5. Reacting to everything. Here is a sentence from Meditations that should be tattooed somewhere you can see it every morning. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he had power over his mind, not outside events, and that realizing this, he would find strength. Notice what he is not saying. He is not saying outside events don't matter. He is not pretending the plague, the wars, the betrayals around him were fine. He is saying something far more precise. The event and your reaction to the event are two separate things, connected only by a very thin, very fast bridge inside your own head. And that bridge, unlike almost everything else in life, is entirely yours to control. Marcus Aurelius, of all people, had a front row seat to this exact betrayal. His own trusted general, a man named Avidius Cassius, declared himself emperor and rebelled against him while Marcus was away at war, a man he had promoted, trusted, and elevated. According to the historian Cassius Dio, when Marcus was finally told that Cassius had been killed by his own soldiers before the rebellion could even reach him, Marcus did not celebrate. He reportedly said he had hoped to forgive the man, and was denied even that chance. Read that again. The most powerful man in the world, betrayed by someone he had personally elevated, and his private reaction was not vengeance. It was grief that he never got to offer mercy. That is not weakness. That is a level of self-command most of us will spend our whole lives trying to reach. But notice something else in this story, something quieter. Marcus did not pretend the betrayal didn't happen. He didn't keep Cassius in his inner circle afterward, hoping it would resolve itself. The relationship was over, whether or not forgiveness was ever spoken aloud. You have people like this in your life right now. You know who they are before I even finish the sentence. The friend who resurfaces exactly when they need a favor and vanishes the second the favor is granted. The family member whose calls only come during a crisis, theirs, never yours. You don't need to hate them. You don't need a confrontation, a speech, a dramatic exit. You simply, quietly, stop being available in the same way. Let your time go somewhere it's actually reciprocated. Here's the part nobody tells you. The silence you create by doing this is louder than any argument could ever be. Number 7. Attachment to outcomes you cannot control. This is where the discipline gets genuinely difficult, because it asks you to release your grip on the very things you care about most. You already know what it feels like when that bridge collapses. The driver cuts you off, and suddenly your whole morning is ruined. Someone leaves your message on read, and suddenly you're composing an entire imaginary argument in the shower. A stranger online says something cruel, and somehow, an anonymous person you will never meet has just rented space inside your head, rent-free, for the rest of the day. Pay attention to this, because it's the whole discipline in one sentence. Between the event and your reaction, there is a gap. It might only last half a second right now. The entire practice of Stoicism is the art of widening that gap, half a second, then 2 seconds, then long enough to actually choose your response instead of simply detonating it. Quietly eliminate the automatic reaction. Not the feeling, you're allowed to feel everything. Just the automatic part. The part where the world pulls the trigger and you don't even notice your hand was on it. There's a practical trick the ancient Stoics used to widen that gap, and it still works today, almost unchanged. When something disturbs you, before you respond, ask yourself a single question. What did this actually take from me? Not what did it feel like it took, what did it actually take? Someone insults you online. What did they actually take? Nothing. Not your time, unless you give it to them. Not your reputation, unless the people who matter to you actually believe them. Not your day, unless you hand it over voluntarily. Most disturbances, when you ask this question honestly, turn out to have taken almost nothing at all except the attention you chose to give them after the fact. The event was small. The reaction was the only thing that made it large. Number 6. People who only show up when they need something. This one is harder to talk about, because it usually means someone you love. Marcus Aurelius divided the entire world into exactly 2 categories, a framework he inherited from Epictetus. Things within your control, your judgments, your effort, your character, your choices. And things outside your control, literally everything else. Other people's opinions. The outcome of the job interview. Whether the person you love loves you back the way you hoped. Whether your effort is rewarded on the timeline you wanted. The weather. The market. The verdict. Here's what most people get wrong about this idea. They think it means not caring about outcomes. It doesn't. You are allowed to want the job. You are allowed to want the relationship to work. What you are not allowed to do, not allowed, in the sense that it will genuinely destroy you if you try, is attach your peace of mind to something you don't have final authority over. Put your full effort into the things you control. Prepare for the interview relentlessly. Show up for the relationship completely. And then, at the threshold where your control actually ends, let go. Not because you don't care. Because caring past that threshold produces nothing except suffering that changes absolutely nothing about the result. There's one more thing hidden inside this lesson, and it's the most freeing part of the whole framework. If the outcome isn't yours to control, then it was never a fair measure of your worth in the first place. You can lose the job and still have done everything right. You can lose the person and still have loved well. The scoreboard you thought you failed was never actually measuring you. There's an image the Stoics return to often to make this idea concrete, and it might help you the same way it helped them. Imagine an archer. A skilled archer trains for years. She studies the wind, steadies her breathing, perfects her form, and releases the arrow with everything she has. And then, the instant it leaves her hand, something happens that is entirely outside her control. A sudden gust. A bird crossing the path. The target itself shifting in a way she couldn't have predicted. The arrow misses. Was she a bad archer? No. She did everything within her power flawlessly. The miss belonged to the wind, not to her skill. The Stoics asked you to live exactly like that archer, total effort up to the release, and total release of attachment the instant the arrow leaves your hand. Not because the outcome doesn't matter. Because your character was never actually riding on the outcome. It was riding on the shot. Number 8. Excess, of possessions, of noise, of indulgence. Marcus Aurelius lived in the most opulent palace on earth, and yet some of his most repeated private reminders to himself are about simplicity. He wrote about not needing much to live well, a short list of true necessities, and beneath that list, mountains of things people convince themselves they cannot live without. There's a story, possibly apocryphal but revealing regardless, that Marcus sold off palace treasures, jewelry, silks, even furniture belonging to the imperial household, to fund a military campaign rather than raise taxes on citizens already suffering from plague and war. Whether or not every detail of that account is precise, the character behind it is consistent with everything else we know about the man. He treated luxury as a tool that could be picked up or set down, never as an identity he needed to protect. That is not the same as suppressing grief. He grieved. The historical record is clear that he grieved deeply and openly for his children. The discipline was never about refusing to feel pain. It was about refusing to let the pain become the entire story of who he was. You are allowed to have a terrible year. You are not required to become the terrible year. Here is how you tell the difference, in practice, between healthy grief and the slow slide into self-pity. Grief looks backward at what was lost and honors it. Self-pity looks around at the present moment and asks the world to notice how unfair it's been to you specifically. One is an act of love for what's gone. The other is a quiet request for an audience. There is nothing wrong with needing comfort, go find it, from the people who actually love you, in the amount that's honest. But watch closely for the moment when the story of your hardship starts becoming more important to you than the hardship itself. That's the moment to gently, privately, put it down. Number 10, and this is the one that ties every other item on this list together. Wasting your attention on things that were never yours to hold in the first place. Every single item we've covered tonight, the need for approval, the complaining, the comparison, the announcing, the reacting, the toxic relationships, the outcome chasing, the excess, the self-pity, every one of them is, underneath, a misallocation of the exact same resource. Your attention. The single most valuable thing you own, and the one thing almost nobody protects on purpose. You don't have to sell your furniture tonight. But ask yourself something honest. How much of what fills your apartment, your closet, your feed, your evenings, is actually adding to your life, and how much of it is simply noise you've grown so used to that you no longer notice the volume? Quietly eliminate one category of excess this month. Not everything at once, that never sticks. Just one drawer. One subscription. 1 hour of scrolling replaced with 1 hour of silence. You will be shocked at how much mental space that single change returns to you. Number 9. Self-pity. This is the one that will sting the most, so I'll say it as gently and as clearly as I can. Self-pity feels like comfort. It feels like someone finally acknowledging how hard things have been for you. But it operates exactly like complaining older, more dangerous sibling, because instead of just narrating the bad event, it builds an entire identity on top of it. You stop being someone this happened to, and slowly become someone this defines. Marcus Aurelius lost multiple children. Historians estimate as many as 8 or 9 of his children died before adulthood, in an era when infant and child mortality devastated even the most privileged families. He led a war against invaders on one border while a plague ravaged the empire from within. He had, by any measure, more legitimate grounds for self-pity than almost anyone in recorded history. And yet the entries in his private journal, written for no audience but himself, are not entries of despair. They are entries of duty. Get up in the morning, he reminds himself, even when you don't want to, because the work of being human is waiting, and it does not wait for your mood to improve first. Marcus Aurelius understood something that modern neuroscience has only recently caught up to. Your life is not measured in years. It is measured in units of attention, spent one moment at a time, and once spent, they are gone forever, there is no getting a single one of them back. He wrote to himself constantly about the shortness of life, specifically to weaponize that fact against wasted time. Not to make himself anxious about death, but to make himself furious about waste. Here's the last thing nobody tells you, and it's the reason this entire list has to be quiet. If you announce that you're eliminating these 10 things, you turn a private discipline into a public performance, and the performance will eat the very attention you were trying to reclaim. Nobody needs a press release about your growth. The version of you that no longer complains, no longer chases approval, no longer explains himself to people who were never listening, that version doesn't need an audience. He was never doing it for one. So here are your 3 takeaways, and I want you to actually carry these with you tonight, not just hear them and move on. First, discipline was never about becoming someone new. It was about quietly removing the parts of you that were never really yours to begin with, habits you absorbed from other people's fear, not your own values. Second, nobody has to know you're doing this. In fact, it works better if they don't. The moment you make it a performance, you've already lost half the discipline to the audience. Third, and this is the one Marcus Aurelius returned to more than any other, in that tent, on that frozen river, in the last months of his own life. You do not get an infinite number of days to practice any of this. He died in the year 180, likely near Vindobona, modern-day Vienna, far from the marble palaces of Rome, in a military camp, doing the quiet, undramatic work of holding an empire together until his very last breath. No grand farewell speech survives him. Just the notebook. Just the discipline. Just a man who spent his final years quietly eliminating everything that didn't matter, so that what remained was entirely, unmistakably him. You don't need a tent on a frozen river to start. You don't need an empire, and you certainly don't need anyone's permission. You just need to stop telling people what you're eliminating, and start actually eliminating it. Keep this between us.